So welcome to this week's of Crap No One Tells You. With me today is Dr. Mark Lund from Twin Lakes Coaching. And we brought him on board specifically because he's a doctor that transitioned to doing other things. And we'll talk a little bit more about the business you're doing now. But so my question is, what is the crap no one tells you about becoming a doctor?
It's absolutely amazing. The crap no one tells you, and we probably need 2 or 3 podcasts to do this, but you are driven by a primal desire to help other human beings when you want to become a physician. The goal is to make a difference in people's lives, is to practice medicine, to have a relationship with other human beings that is at a very different level. The intimacy of the physician-patient relationship is just profound. And you are driven forward and you're willing to put so much of your life on hold in order to get there. And to sort of sum up what the crap is behind becoming a physician is that it's nothing like you really thought. You very quickly realize that it is a place where the art of medicine is no longer valued. The practice of medicine is not that which is driven by physicians, but which is driven by big business, venture capital, private equity, the governmental and non-governmental constraints upon you, the third-party payers, things like that are really what control it. And that the autonomy to make decisions that you think are best for the human being, your patient in front of you, are constrained by so many outside sources, and that your time is truly just whittled away from patient care to do mundane things that again are put in the way of taking care of people.
So let me see if I understood this correctly, because here's what I heard. You get into being a doctor because you genuinely care about people and you want to make a difference. And then bureaucracy and other things step in and you end up spending more time doing BS stuff that is not related to medicine than actually taking care of a patient.
Exactly.
Okay, so I heard you right. Like that wasn't my imagination.
You heard it right, and you were succinct, and I was not.
Okay. Yes. So, which is kind of funny because I ended up in the hospital a couple of years ago. And I always remember the very last conversation I had with my doctor. I'd been in the hospital for 24 hours and they send in this patient advocate or whatever the title was of this person that's running me through of what I may or may not get billed for. And 5 minutes later, the doctor comes in and he's holding his clipboard and he goes, "Oh, they put this down." He's like, "Oh, you might get billed for that." Well, but if I phrase it like this and I put this, then it's a different type of stay and the insurance company will then cover it. I remember sitting there looking at him going, wait a minute. So you have to finagle some weird diagnosis on a piece of paper in order for a third party to then say this is okay, but if you put this down, that's not okay. And I'm like, but is it the same thing? And he's like, practically, it's just a matter of we have to word it a certain way in order for it to be. And I'm like, you can't just tell them what's actually wrong. And,
Yeah. It is interesting that the constraints upon billing, but also upon what is allowed or not allowed as far as medication, testing, etc. Virtually every state has, if not every state, has laws against practicing medicine without a license. And that's a good thing. You should be a licensed professional to practice medicine. Insurance companies practice medicine every day, and they practice it without a license. They just call it prior authorization. And they put the physician through hurdles in order to limit the care that you want to give. And by doing that, they're literally practicing medicine without a license. There's a great comedian who's a physician, he's an ophthalmologist, he goes by Dr. Glaucoma Feckin. He has a little skit on exactly this with, he actually points out the actual insanity of how insurance companies practice medicine without a medical license.
I never actually thought of it that way, but I guess that is correct, because there is some, not to knock whoever does that job, but there's a pencil pusher somewhere making a decision that may contradict what the doctor deems to be the best course of action, all because of billing.
And when you get to the final point as a physician where you go, quote, peer to peer, I had a young woman who was in her 40s, had a nodule in her lung that was seen on a CAT scan of her abdomen, because the lower part of the lung is seen there, and the rest of the lung isn't. And we know that just because you're a non-smoker doesn't mean you can't get lung cancer. Dana Reeves, Chris Reeves' wife, died of that as a lifelong non-smoker. Well, she saw this. She came to us. We needed to get CAT scan of the rest of her lung so we could see what was going on, and we were refused. And we finally went up through, and I got to a peer review where I'm supposed to be talking to another physician, and I'm talking to another physician. This physician happened to be a pediatric neurologist talking to a adult lung specialist, and that person was telling me I wasn't allowed to get the scan, that it wasn't medically indicated. I know nothing about pediatric neurology. I would never be in a position to tell them what they should or shouldn't be doing. But yet, because they work for the insurance company, and the fact that they have an MD, regardless of specialty, they can then control what we do or don't do.
Interesting. Honestly, that's kind of mind-blowing. Now, here's insurance companies billing, all that stuff aside. So I can't imagine if I got into my industry, which I am in, and I love what I do, and I wouldn't be able to actually do what I do. Like, that would, if I would spend more time doing bureaucracy and different things and fighting with other people about how we should approach things, that would drive me absolutely nuts. I can't imagine that this is good for doctors in general and like just their mental health, like having to constantly have these fights and going, this is crap, like this isn't the way it should be, and yet they're forced to do more of this than, well, I'm not going to say do more of this, but they're forced to do a lot of this stuff instead of actually practicing medicine, helping people. So are doctors getting renewed? Are we seeing the same number of doctors come in as are leaving out on the other end? Is this the profession that people are now getting scared of because more of this stuff is coming out? Like, what's the status on that industry as a whole?
It's interesting. There's a couple of different choke points in it. Number one is how many people wanted to enter medical school. And the people who want to enter medical school is relatively stable. It's going down. It has come up actually with the pandemic. Again, people have a drive to want to help other human beings, and that's a good thing. One of the first chokeholds is the number of residency slots. We are in a position where we are losing physicians, and we have a shortage of physicians. And we have, because of things that were put in place during the pandemic, a significant loss of physicians, both for mental health as well as for bureaucratic/political reasons. But our ability to move people through, the number of residency slots has dwindled, is cut. The ability to pay for those, there are a number of different reasons, but there are more medical school graduates than there are residency slots in the US. Therefore, people come out and you can't go and practice medicine unless you do your residency. So therefore, there are people who literally get through with medical school, have all the debt, and have no ability to move forward. And that's a problem. And it's not just the people who, there's the old joke about, what's the, what do you call the first, graduate in the medical school class and the very bottom, graduate, they call them doctor, right? Mm-hmm. So, but the fact is that, it's people throughout that spectrum. It's not just those people at the very bottom that theoretically, would not be the quote best doctors. And that's not true.
They may not be the highest book scoring doctor but could end up being the best bedside manner doctor.
100%.
Yes.
100%. So, there are choke points that go through there. Back into the late 70s, early 80s, Dr. Maslach looked at what was burnout and physician burnout. And since that time, so again, we're looking at 50 years or so, 40, 50 years, the presence of burnout in physicians has been increasing. And burnout gets to a point in which you literally have a difficulty in being able to do your job, but also to be the human that you are. You pull back, you have a lack of belief in yourself, you become irritable. There's a lot of things that go with pure burnout. And this has been increasing. And we're up to a point in which the last report that I saw, the lowest incidence of burnout was in dermatologists, and that was at 30%. Roughly 1 out of 3 dermatologists
Or
are burnt out,
dermatologists.
right? When you look at pulmonary critical care like myself, when you look at internal medicine or family practice, when you look at emergency medicine physicians, you're in the range of 50% plus. And
That are in some stage of burnout.
that are in actually probably moderate to severe burnout, not just light burnout. So we have a significant problem. Nursing is the same way, by the way. Nurses also have significant burnout. The healthcare system and the ability to drive people through their desire to be good humans, take care of people, and therefore literally to almost take advantage of that because they don't have very good boundary systems. That's not taught in medical school and nursing school.
Right. And when your core is taking care of someone, boundaries is already kind of an issue for you because your desire to take care of someone will take over putting boundaries in place a lot of times. So like, I'm not going to call them a vulnerable population, but they are not, because of their willingness and their desire to genuinely help, that often will take over I can't help it, like the cruelty of the system. Like, I hate to say it that way, but based on our conversation, that's honestly the best way I feel like I can describe it.
It is a relatively cruel system, not because it sets out to be that way, but because we have lost the focus. The focus had always been on the human being. What do we do for that person? Now it's about cost containment and about profit margin. The vast majority of hospitals are owned by capital groups, capital equity, whether it's venture capital, private equity, whatever. They are very large conglomerations and they drive things. Incidentally, a lot of those hospitals that they own are nonprofits and they get all the nonprofit benefits of taxation in the area, but the company that owns them and takes them out, and they're supposed to have these certain rules they work within and all that, and they typically don't. But it is an issue because you have a stagnation in the number of nurses and physicians. But if you look at the growth of administrators, it is huge compared to the clinical staff. And people talk about the cost of medicine. Well, a lot of that is being brought up by this really heavy, management system that's
By bureaucracy.
Exactly. And the bureaucracy is created by either systems, right, or organizational level issues.
Or laws, or
Yeah.
there's no doctor or nurse will ever go, we need more paperwork, right? Like,
No. And as a matter of fact, most physicians, when they do their charting, because of the time constraints that are put on them to see a patient, most of them wind up doing charting after hours, and that's free. That's time that they have to expend that they don't get paid for. When you need to do your prior authorizations, there's no payment for that. If you go to an attorney, you get charged per,
Right. For the draft, for the final, like
exactly.
for the interview, yes.
Exactly.
Yep.
And all these things are in there. And then the administrators will come and say, by the way, you need to do this. Okay. But, if I'm doing that, I can't be seeing as many patients. No, you see as many patients, but you still have to do something else. And that's that bureaucratic overtone. Again, this isn't just physicians. This is nurses. Most nurses don't see their patients very much. They are documenting, they are secretaries in a sense for what goes on. And somebody walks in and they're seeing a PCT, a patient care technician. They're seeing a nursing assistant.
Mm-hmm.
They're not seeing the nurse because the nurse comes in maybe once or twice in a shift. And the rest of the time, what's happening is they are actually doing a lot of charting there in front of the computer and doing something rather than doing bedside nursing.
So they're not doing what they actually went to school for and take care of a patient.
That's right.
They're now stuck in this bureaucratic environment.
Exactly.
So shift gears a little bit. So originally I'm from Iceland, lived in Denmark, as some may know, just putting it in here. I remember when I was in Iceland that it was always if you needed some kind of specialty care, there was this thing that the US was always the best place to go because they had the most advanced care. They had the best qualified doctors. They had the most amount of knowledge. Does that still hold true?
I think that knowledge has become more democratized and not necessarily in a bad way. There are some absolutely phenomenal people in other parts of the world that are leading. And that, again, is not a bad thing. I think the U.S. itself also has an incredible population of just phenomenal physicians. Part of the question then is, can you get to them?
Yeah, right. I can keep them in the practice.
Can you keep them in the practice? But also, even if they're there, can you get to them? So a lot of people don't know what insurance companies do. So one of my brother-in-laws, I'll just leave his name out, but one of my brother-in-laws had developed cancer.
Okay.
He lived in a New England state and had insurance that was within that state. I wanted to bring him down to the cancer hospital I was working in.
Okay.
The insurance company said no, because you're constrained to only that one state. You can go to any hospital in the state,
but you can't
leave the state, even if there's somebody else who happens to be better or whatever. A lot of people don't know that some of those, constraints, restraints are within their own insurance.
So you may literally have someone, we could be in Pennsylvania, and there could be a doctor in New Jersey with a specialty that could absolutely save, now this is hypothetical,
sure,
could save your life, but you would have to pay out of your own pocket to go see that doctor because your insurance wouldn't cover any New Jersey-based doctor.
That is correct.
That is messed up.
Very much so. Very much so. As a matter of fact, this is, again, long-standing. I'll go back to when I was a fellow, and I won't refer to the hospital as looking to send somebody, but it was a hospital from a regional state. And I was at University of Pennsylvania in the ICU, and a medical team in another high-quality hospital, ICU, academic hospital, said that this person needed to be sent to University of Penn for what they had. It was across state lines. The insurance company refused because they said, well, actually, the hospital you're in can provide the same level of care as University of Pennsylvania. And the doctor in the referring hospital said, actually, typically, yes, but in this case, they need to go to this one hospital.
Right. Because of some type of specialty, whatever that is, right? Okay.
And the insurance company was refusing. There were a couple of things that then intervened that we don't need to get into. But the fact is that there were some special circumstances cut for somebody. But the fact is that this ability to move, to go and say, okay, I just want to go to the Cleveland Clinic and get the best in this, or I want to go to Hopkins or Penn or Harvard, may not always be there for you, because insurances have different levels of constraints that are put in them.
So when you say insurance companies practice medicine every day, that's basically what they're practicing medicine every day without any type of license. It's just someone reading a document saying, well, theoretically, this hospital and this hospital is the same because our contract with what the services they can provide say the same thing. So it's the same hospital, not keeping in mind that they may be differently equipped, both with equipment and staff, like
Exactly.
specialties. It's kind of scary. So, well, now the burnout rate you were talking about starts making a lot of sense. But that leads me to my next question is, you have started a coaching company now. And you are working with physicians, you're working with nurses, you're working with, well, all kinds of people, entrepreneurs that not only are going through burnout, but have started to realize that what they're doing with their life may not be where they wanted to end up. So tell me, how did you go from being a pulmonary doctor, right, to going, oh my God, this is a much better way to help people? Because you're still getting your base need met, right? You're still helping people. You're just helping them in a different way. And after talking to you, I can see that helping the doctors and the nurses this way actually may be more, I'm not going to say more important, but that is just as important because, well, you're helping more people by proxy, right? If you can work with them, help them through what they're going through, and they stay in the profession longer, you're helping more people than if you were just being a doctor, I guess.
You know, it's interesting. There's the old discussion about what was referred to as the eighth wonder of the world, and that was compounding interest. If you were offered $1 million cash today or a single cent for 31 days, and it will double for 31, but only 31 days, which would you take? And you always take the single cent, the penny.
Right.
And that's because that compounding interest winds up being at 31 days, somewhere around 10,737,000.
That's great.
It's increased.
The same thing. Someone asked you, if you take an 8.5 by 11 piece of paper and you open it up and it doubles in size, and then you open it up and it doubles in size, how long would it take? How many times would you have to open it to get it to the moon? And it's some crazy low number, like 23 or like, because once the doubling starts, it's astronomical.
It is. And so any place that what you can do is you can help others who help others. You not only compound what you're doing, but you start to change things in orders of magnitude, 10, 100x.
Mm-hmm.
So whether it's physicians, nurses, therapists, whether it's entrepreneurs who provide so much of our economy and you know, the jobs, take good care of their employees. The fact is that if you help those who help others, you're always doing something good. So you asked a really interesting question, which is, how did you make such a massive leap? And actually, it's not all that massive, because when you're in the intensive care unit in particular, and anything in medicine, yes, there are psychiatrists, but psychiatry, psychology plays into every single part of human-to-human interaction as a physician, as a nurse. But then you take people who are their most stressed. They are either in the ICU and they're scared of dying or wonder what's going to happen or what the surgery is going to be. Their family is there. It could be their husband, their wife who's lying in bed, their grandparent, their son, their daughter. And now you're dealing with people who are truly stressed. Someone who's at the end of their life. And now you have factions of the family who don't agree on whether or not to terminate heroic measures or what. The fact is that a lot of this comes down to discussions and human-to-human interaction and helping people get through what is some of the toughest times and therefore some of the largest obstacles that they faced in their life. And the transitions. I am about to lose my spouse. I'm about to lose my son. And how do I transition and sort of maintain some sort of life? And what happens in that moment becomes the foundation for where they're going. So physicians who are in those areas, particularly critical care, And I know that well, so I wouldn't take it from any other physician that they don't, but particularly critical care in my own experience, we've got to have some of those conversations anyway. So the transition was not as big. What I found is that
So you realized you were having these types of conversation, but the topic could have just been slightly different. The type of conversation was still very similar.
that's the foundation piece. There's a transition piece in there as well, because transition, transformation, transmutation are all those things that sort of happen in a space that's either narrow or broad, but you don't always have the ability. It was Steve Jobs who said you can never connect the dots looking forward. You always look backward. And that's where we sort of, we, me, myself, and I guess, are in a position to say, okay, I see this. I got to a point that I just was really burned out. I was, not at my peak performance anymore. And I needed to find some way of being able to do something that allowed me to live true and authentically to myself, which was to care for other people, to provide them their very best life, whether in their physical health or in their emotional health. And by looking at that and looking at myself and doing a lot of deep work, I was able to find that actually what I was doing was the same, and who I was a healer, and I could be a healer just in a different realm. And that's what I chose to do, but that I had the experience. It wasn't that, okay, I'm going to go from doing, lung medicine to doing kidney medicine or, something like that. It was that I'm able to take the skills I have, the years of experience I have, and then I studied. And I did exactly what I did to get through medical school. Go to the literature and learn more about psychology, about psychiatry, about neuroscience.
What causes burnout? How do you deal with it? How do you help people get through it? You basically restudied medicine.
I restudied medicine. I restudied human beings. I studied myself. And at that point, was able to really drive forward and say, tell you what, this is the issue. And as I looked at burnout and I understood what Dr. Maslach and others had found and done research on, and I started to read, I was really surprised to see that burnout, while I was looking in one particular sector, i.e. healthcare, that entrepreneurs had burnout.
Okay.
That particularly during the pandemic, that parents were experiencing burnout.
Yep. Business owners, teachers,
everybody, our law enforcement and first responders.
Mm-hmm.
And therefore, and I found that although the incident precipitators of burnout were different,
right,
the burnout was all the same.
Oh yeah, but it's emotionally, it becomes the same. It starts affecting, it affects everybody slightly differently, but it is still a hugely eroding factor that doesn't just apply to work, right? Like that comes with you and starts affecting everything else in your life.
Exactly.
So yeah, I can see how, now that we've had a chat, how what you used to do with what you're doing now really isn't, because at first I was like, that's quite the leap. And I'm like, well, no, it was more like a big step.
It was a big step or a, or a quick kid slide,
right.
One of the two. And what we also found is that the one thing that a lot of people, as we talk to them, some of the female physicians, they're like, if you want to know what it is as far as a symptom for burnout, just ask them how many times they just sit and sob in the shower, because it's the only place that they can be themselves and they don't have to be somebody else. They don't have to be the doctor. They don't have to be the leader. They don't have to be the mom or the spouse. And most of the people that we asked, it's 2, 3, 4 times a week. They just sit there and sob in the shower. Burnout, when it gets bad enough, eviscerates people. The end of burnout is physician suicide. Right now, physicians are committing suicide at a rate almost that of our war heroes that have come back.
Which is staggeringly high.
It's incredibly high. And there was a hospital that made the news up in New York City about a year and a half ago. And they had within, I think it was about a 6-month period. I might be a little wrong on the time frame. They had 3 physicians commit suicide on their staff.
That's insane.
And in order to help them deal with the stress, what they did was they bought them a ping pong table.
Oh, perfect.
So, you know, there's another physician. There was a law just passed that's starting to put some federal funding behind looking at physician burnout and physician suicide. And it was, it's named after a female emergency medicine physician from New York City. Again, the end product of burnout is suicide or substance abuse.
I mean, that's like the extreme, but there are so many things. People often think that burnout is like a thing that just happens, right? Like it's, you lit a candle and now you're in burnout. And I'm like, no, burnout happens over a period of time and it has all kinds of symptoms along the way. Yes, suicide, yes, drug abuse, all that stuff is at the very tail end of it.
Mm-hmm.
But you probably had 30 symptoms or 30 things that were indicators before you ever got to that. And yet people tend to ignore those. Right? And it's the same thing with medicine, right? Oh, it's my knee hurt a little bit yesterday. Oh, don't worry about it, right? Like,
Yeah.
Oh, my knee hurt a little bit more today. I'll be fine, right? And then 6 months later, you go to the doctor and they're like, yeah, you have a torn meniscus or whatever it is. And you're like, oh, can it be fixed? They're like, well, if you would have come in 6 months ago,
Exactly.
you know? So yeah, and I think people just don't know how to properly identify that they are starting in that phase of burnout. Because I think there's a lot of people that like kind of get into it, but circumstances, something changes and they somehow manage to get back out of it, right? But there's a huge swath of not just doctors, just the population that I think is constantly living in that burnout stage. And honestly, I think they're not miserable all the time, but they're miserable more than what they need to be, like, if that makes sense.
100%. And actually coming full circle, you asked about, going into medicine. There is very good, well done literature studies that show that burnout starts in medical school. It starts that early. It accelerates in residency and if you do one fellowship, and then continues to take off. You're also right that the symptoms, and the reason people don't typically sort of understand it is because it's not a firecracker. It doesn't just explode in your face. It is literally...
It's like a firecracker with a really long fuse.
Exactly. And it just burns. The fuse also gets a little bit bigger as it goes. So there's more and more flame with each foot of the fuse that burns. So, when you look at, if you've ever had the experience of walking into a physician or hearing someone who says that physician just had absolutely, no compassion.
It's been taken from them.
Compassion fatigue is one of the signs of moral injury and burnout. The way we get to burnout is through called moral injury. Well, what's moral injury? It's a cognitive dissonance. It's, I am a human who has promised to take care of this other human. And now because of either systems in place, whether it's insurance companies, governmental, non-governmental organizations, issues as far as the facility that you're in, whatever it happens to be, I'm not able to take care of this human in the way I'm supposed to. I know what I'm supposed to do, but I'm not allowed to. That's very much akin to I'm an 18-year-old soldier and I'm a good, loving human being, but now I'm in a rice paddy in some far off land and I need to kill a human being. Well, am I good or am I evil?
Right.
I was always a good, loving human being, but I just took someone's life. That's not good. And that cognitive dissonance is there. It's also there in medicine and in nursing. I'm supposed to do this, but I can't.
Which is also the root of PTSD.
Exactly. So you take, and that's actually our problem that's coming up now, because that moral injury and burnout was just sort of there. But then you put in 2 years of a pandemic and the stress, as well as the potential not to die because of an unseen bullet or shrapnel coming at you, but actually to die because of an invisible agent, i.e. COVID.
Right.
We have doctors and nurses who have true post-traumatic stress disorder.
Right.
And we've never seen something like that.
It's crazy. Well, so on that note, I want to thank you for coming in. I'm pretty sure we'll be doing this again.
Anytime, Gummy.
We're going to put some of your information. People will be able to find you. We'll put your guys' website, your name, all that stuff up. So thank you again for coming in and telling us some of the crap no one tells you about becoming a doctor. And we look forward to seeing you again.
We look forward to being here. Have an absolutely epic day.